Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. Glad to have you guys here on this Sunday. It's a Sunday, the 5th of December, 2021. Thank you for tuning in. Now, here's the thing. How many of you guys been driving down the highway, and all of a sudden you notice in your rearview mirror that there's a policeman behind you. He's following you. Now, maybe he's not really interested in you, but that feeling, having him back there constantly watching everything you do. Oh, did I put my turn signal on? Oh, did I come to a full stop at that last stop sign? And he's constantly watching you. And maybe he drives behind you for 5 whole miles. Everybody out there as a driver's probably had that happen to them at least once. And during that 5 miles, it's the worst 5 miles of your life. Quite seriously. Because you always have to concentrate on what you're doing. Making sure you don't make any mistakes because he's going to nab you. He's going to pull you over and give you a ticket. If any little thing. Because he's watching you. He's right behind you. Everybody's had that happen to them. Well, guess what? How would you like it if when your car was manufactured that they put a little tiny policeman inside your car on manufacture that's there all the time, every time you start your car up, watching you, just like the policeman that drove behind you was watching you. But normally when you drive, you feel comfortable, you feel relaxed because you if you do make a little mistake, if there's no policeman back there or no police around, if you do make a little mistake, it's no big deal. Everybody makes mistakes when they're driving, right? But imagine a future where they install a little policeman inside your car into the computer circuitry that's constantly watching everything you do, everything you say. And that little policeman can record everything you do, everything you say, and he can switch your car off anytime he wants because he's determined that maybe you're impaired. Well, you know how computers are. Maybe it's a new car. Maybe you haven't figured out how to use your windshield wipers properly yet. Because these new cars get more and more complicated all the time. They got about 30 different settings on the windshield wiper alone. It's not just an on-off switch anymore. It's like got clicks and buttons and expressions. It's got knobs and about 5 knobs on it and about 24 different switch settings, and so it starts to rain. And you got this little police officer watching you in the car. But you're not used to this windshield wiper thing. And you're like turning it off and switching this switch and switching that switch, and you take your eyes off the road and you look down at it and you're trying to figure this thing out and you're starting to curse and everything else. And the little police officer that's watching you, that's built into the car circuitry, says, "Huh, this person must be drunk." Click! And then you hear this thing come on that says, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and everything goes dead in your car and your steering wheel locks up. Right? Well, maybe you're in a situation where you can't get over or anything else. You're on a 4-lane freeway. There's no off-ramps or anything else. You hear your car's going dead because... Well, guess what, guys? I am here to tell you something. Does all this sound like some sort of futuristic nightmare? It's coming. It's legislated into the new infrastructure bill. They're going to go to auto car manufacturers and they're going to say, "Hey, look, you got to put these in to every car that's made, every new car." So the American dream of buying a new car and floating down the freeway, oh, I'm happy today, I'm happy. I got my new car. I've worked for 20 years to get the money I need to buy a brand new car and drifting down the freeway, But you're going to have this little police officer watching you now, recording. And probably going to record. I can't see them doing it any other way. They got this new technology and they're going mag with it. Now, you know, guys, for the longest time now, you know this has been a pet peeve of mine. All the newfangled stuff they put in these new cars. I hate every little bit of it. I wish they'd just strip it all out. I don't even like auto power windows. I hate them. I like the old crank style roll up window. I mean, are we so lazy in our modern society that we can't even turn a crank? And all these things like automatic power seats. Oh, I hate anti-lock brakes. I hate anti-lock brakes. I don't even listen, guys. I don't even like the new gas pedals. They got something called a throttle body now. And they got an electronic signal that goes to the throttle body that comes from the gas pedal, and that's not really a gas pedal anymore. Used to be in the old days, they had a gas pedal, they had this cable that ran up to the carburetor and turned the gas on and off, and it was a direct, when you push the gas pedal, it was actually pushing a cable. Now it doesn't even push a cable, all it does is push a sensor, and the sensor relays a signal to the throttle body. So there's a disconnect there. There's air between the sensors. This is foolishness on a massive scale. What are we doing to our civilization? Just with what we're doing to our cars. Think about all these gadgets they keep putting. They got cameras in the rear of the car, your backup cameras, and it just keeps going on and on. More circuitry, more wires inside a car, and making it more and more complex. Well, you know, there's something called complexity theory, where when you make something more and more complex, after a while it ceases to function because it's too complex. What happened in the old days, you know, we used to have carburetors on the cars. And we used to have, everything we used to have, they're stripping it out so fast. And now they're doing exactly the same thing with the monetary system. So now what's going on in the world? Well, there's a new variant out there. Yeah, it's coming. And, you know, we're living in a world that's gone so complex. How I mean complex is especially the money. They are messing with the money and in ways you could not imagine. And like in the old days, you know, they used to have cash registers you used to go to in the stores, you know. Now, I remember when I was a kid, they still had these registers in. You pull the handle on the register. It wasn't even plugged in to the wall. You pulled a handle on it, it went ka-ching. It made a ka-ching sound. That's where they got the ka-ching sound for cash. Like ka-ching was from a register. And the drawer would open up, and there was only room in there for coins and bills. Okay? There was different drawers in there, each one for different, that is to separate the coins and the bills and everything else. Well, they've taken all those old registers out and they've smashed them to pieces and sold them for scrap. And what come in to replace them? Well, the new register you had to plug in to the electrical wall circuit outlet. Well, they've torn all them out too now and replaced them. What come in to replace them was a register that has to be connected to the internet and to the wall and has scanners on it and everything else and is capable of making transactions that are connected to the new debit system that they've brought in, which is not even money at all. All it is a digital ledger. So it's directly connected to your bank. So what they've essentially done is we used to do all of our business with two-party transactions. So you had your cash in your wallet, right? And you used to pay for whatever it is with the old ka-ching cash registers. And what they would do is they'd give you a change, and it was a two-party transaction. It was you with your money, and it was the store with their clerk. And that was it, right? Now, all transactions, all of them, even cash transactions, are done through third-party transactions. So how does that work? And how does that, what am I actually talking about? I'm talking about now you as one party. The store, again, is the second party. And now there's a third party that's horned in. And that third party is verification with your bank that you have the funds, if you're using a debit card. Or verification with the Visa company if you're using a credit card. Or verification, even if you're using cash, they still have to have that, verification thing hooked up. Just that they don't utilize it if you're using cash. But still, it has to be hooked up. It has to be connected to the internet, because that's where they keep all their inventory nowadays on these stores. How do you think, if you go to one store now, say you go to a store called X, I don't know, I'm not even going to name the store, but say you go to a store called X, right? They can search in their online inventory. If you can go up and ask them, do you have any of these in stock? Well, not at this particular store, but they search in their online inventory and they say, okay, there's a store 2 miles from here. We have them there. Okay, how do you think they do that? They do that because what they do is they have, everything's connected online now, the stores. But potentially the opposite side of this coin is if the internet goes down, these third-party transactions cannot be made. And they've set up a system now by which the internet has to be on and running. Otherwise, you cannot make transactions with said store. And all the stores are switching over to this now. So the big question we should be asking ourselves, if we're all going in for this new way of doing things, whole hog. I mean, we're not holding back any. We're making it so that you cannot even make a cash transaction at any sort of a big store. And all the mom and pop stores are going out of business, let's face it. All that's left is these big stores. So if the big stores are all doing this, they're all going online with their inventory and with their, it has to be hooked up and online for everything to work so that they can even take your money. What happens if the internet goes out? Does that mean we're not going to be able to buy or sell or anything else? Because they went in all hog for the system. Now, what would happen if the internet went out when we had the older system? The old cash registers that used to pull the handle and go cha-ching, and you had cash in your pockets? Well, the internet was no big deal because we didn't use it. Didn't have it. You went back to like 1975. What internet? But it was a system that was safeguarded from the malfunctioning of the internet. Because you didn't have an internet. So what kind of redundant system do we have in place? So if all these big stores, and that's all that's left basically, COVID's just basically doing a sweep, and it's getting rid of all the smaller guys. The smaller guys just can't stay in business. So we got these big stores, big chain stores and stuff, right? That's keeping things going. Well, I applaud them, for keeping things going. But what happens if all of them are set up in a way so that they can't function without the internet and the internet goes down? What's the likelihood of the internet going down? The next question we should go to. We should say, well, if we've made ourselves this vulnerable and made the system this vulnerable, well, let's analyze the internet. Could the internet ever go down? Let's analyze it for a minute. Well, what do we have? Well, first off, one of the biggest things that makes the internet function is they have these big cables that they've dropped into the bottom of the ocean. Because let's face it, our planet's like 90% water. Okay? And you need to get that internet from one place to another. So what they've done is they've taken these fiber optic cables, and really they're not that big. A lot of them are only about as big around their size, they're fair size, they're a thick cable. But they just drop them in, lay them out on the ocean floor, going across the ocean. But they try to maintain these cables, but they got many of them running all over the place. Uh, and yes, these cables are susceptible to things like earthquakes, landslides underneath the water, things like that. But they're also susceptible to other countries' interference, depending on if what kind of a situation we were to get into, maybe like a war or something like that. Uh, and how dependable are they? Well, that's a big question mark, these cables. But now, what other vulnerabilities did the internet have? Well, it's got a massive vulnerability. Massive. Another huge vulnerability is uh, X-class solar flares from space could really, really wreak havoc with the internet. And you have to say, well, how often do we get those? Well, they're one of these things that's like a periodical sort of a thing. It comes around periodically. If we look back in history, we had a massive, let's call it attack, because that's what it was, by the sun in an X-class solar flares that occurred. What was called the Carrington event. And it did attack our systems. It attacked our telegraph systems. Back at the time, that's all we had was telegraph. Attacked our telegraph systems. But in a modern day, if we had such a thing happen, it would attack our internet. It'd be the same sort of thing. It would fry internet cables and everything else, you know. It might take weeks, months, years to get things back running again. The way I see it is, what we're doing is uh, we're creating a monster. Simply put, that could have dire negative effects upon our civilization. And they're not backing off from this. They're not saying, hey, just wait a minute. Now that we have all this new technology, instead of just accepting our new technology and implementing it slowly and sitting back and testing it and waiting to see how this is going to actually function in the real world scenarios, we're just going to slam it all in as fast as we can. We're not even going to test it or anything. What we're going to do is we're not even going to put any redundant systems in place in case of failure. It's this whole hog sort of a thing that I talked about earlier, where they might be moving us far too quickly into this new telecommunications age without examining the implications involved. But, this new thing that they got coming out where they're going to have this thing watching you, this sensor, a chip in your car that's watching you just like a policeman all the time. Now, I'm going to tell you what, I can see where systems like that have a fuzzy sort of logic. They're not like a person. A person can tell the difference between somebody who's really inebriated or really shouldn't be driving instantaneously. They can analyze a person. They can say, oh, that person shouldn't be driving. But a electronic system can be completely fooled by somebody who's just basically a little bit inept rather than shouldn't be driving. They should be driving, but maybe they're not completely familiar with that particular car or how it handles, or maybe they've just had a bad morning and they're giving the computer signals that they're not quite up to driving that morning, or whatever, and the computer is going to switch the car off on them and probably send in a report. I mean, this is like how many of you feel like you want to have a police officer in your car 24/7? An electronic police officer is even worse than a real one. I don't know where we're going with all this, but we're going there fast, guys. And there might be just like a young driver who's been learning to drive for a few weeks, you know, and he thinks hey, I got this. He's like, I got this attitude, like, I got this. Now, I remember when I was a kid and I was learning how to drive, it was the same way. After I had driven for a little while, only driven for a few weeks, car, I was like this attitude, like, I got this. I got this, you know. So I was driving this little car, you know, and I was almost to the point where I was getting ready to go in and take my driver's test to get my real license, you know. I was driving along with Pop, you know, and we were driving along, and, you know, I hadn't learned yet, even though I'd learned everything else, studied the handbooks and everything else. There's things they don't tell you about driving. And one of the things that they didn't tell you is, they didn't tell me, was young drivers always think, well, green light means go, right? You guys out there, green light means go, right? But not always. When you're making a left-hand turn, a solid green light doesn't mean go. And so I was out there. It's like, I got this. I got this. So I was waiting at the green light to make left-hand turn. And, you know, the light turned green. And, well, I got this. Green light means go. So I started to pull out in front of the oncoming traffic that actually has the right-of-way over you, even though you got a green light, right? But this is something, maybe you should tell this. If you're going to teach somebody to drive, maybe you should tell them that ahead of time. Well, Pop pulled the handbrake, slam, pulled the handbrake, and the car skidded to a stop, and the car had good handbrakes. Pulled the handbrake before I went out in front of the lanes of traffic. Lucky he was driving with me, you know. I was like, what did you do that for? He said, don't you know, he said, that that a green light doesn't always mean go. He says the people coming straight through have the right of way, he said. I didn't know that. All that time, you know, I've been a passenger in cars. I hadn't really paid too much attention. But when you're learning to drive, you think green light means go. Anyway, that's what happened. That's the story of what happened. But this is a similar situation in that everybody thinks, hey, we got this. All the people in charge out there, you know, and putting all these systems together and these fiber optic cables and everything else, and taking everything else out that we used to have before we had internet. They think, hey, we got this. But what I'm sitting here saying is, there might be a nasty hidden surprise. And that hidden surprise could come almost instantaneously from, I don't know from where it would come from. But I do know that there's no redundant systems in place. They've stripped them all out. And all we have now is these big fiber optic cables and internet everywhere and debit cards and everything else to do our business. And I know we got a very, what's the word I'm looking for when people are completely, like, they're got that same attitude a young person has when they're learning how to drive, when they figure they know how to do it. They say, I got this. There's that prevalent attitude amongst the people out there who are putting these systems in and stuff. They think, hey, you know, this is foolproof. And I'm here to say, hey, step back from this for a minute and look at the damage that could happen if these systems were to go through some sort of systematic failure caused by, let's say, a sunspot, an X-class solar flare, or by some massive Earth disaster that puts the systems off place. Or even on a smaller scale, say some guy's going down, he's got the little automatic policeman watching everything he does, and it determines that he's drunk even though he isn't. And he's in 4 lanes of traffic going down some sort of big freeway someplace with trucks on his tail and everything else, and the car switches off. Anyway, thank you guys for listening to my show. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the very next episode. Bye-bye.